I want you to imagine for a moment a bright, scorching afternoon, the kind where the air feels thick and every breath is an effort. And I was out on the track at the local park doing my usual run while my daughter was practicing soccer. And honestly, it was brutal. My legs were heavy. My lungs burned. Every fiber of my being was sore. When I run, which is kind of like a plod, but when I run, it is hard because I am not an athlete. I like to run to try and keep, up with exercise. But it feels like to me when I run that my head hurts, my legs hurt, my body hurts, and it's an effort, right? It's something where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do a lap, or I'm going to do 2 laps, or God forbid I could do 3 laps. And on this particular afternoon, there were flies and gnats like constantly going into my ears. And there were just a ton of people like also exercising. And then my dad rang on my phone. He calls me from Australia, and usually on a Sunday afternoon, which is when I was running. And without really thinking about it, I answered the call. And we started talking about his day and my day, but mainly his day. He's just moved into a new house and he's been moving, and we were talking about how he couldn't find one of his boxes, and he's been going to the local supermarket and he's figuring out how to, get the things he needs. And as we talked, something extraordinary happened. I kept running. Now, this is like something you wouldn't have thought about, but what was really fascinating was I wasn't thinking about my legs anymore. In fact, I wasn't thinking about the heat. I wasn't even thinking about the laps. I was just running and talking. And before I knew it, my dad said, well, I should let you go now. You must be exhausted from your run. And I looked up and genuinely surprised myself. I had finished 8 laps. Now, that's a guess because really, I couldn't really remember how many I'd done, but I somehow kind of later started to think about, the time and place, and it was about 8 laps, which I never do. All I remember was being focused on the running, and I had never run better, and I felt great. Interesting, right? So this experience sparked a question in my mind, one that goes against almost everything we're taught about success and achievement. What if sometimes to achieve our deepest focus and perform at our peak, we actually need to be distracted? I'm going to talk a little bit about this today. Hi, I'm Jilly, and welcome to the EntreprenHER Podcast. I love talking about productivity. I love talking with guests today. It's just me today. But I just love talking about business, productivity, getting things done, dreaming big, pursuing your best self, growth, expansion. And today, I really want to talk about how we go about doing things, how we can get things done. So, we live in a world that's obsessed by focus, with focus. We're always taught we have to eliminate distractions. We have to focus on one thing, deep work, and for good reason. Often, if you do multiple things at once, sometimes you're the jack of all trades and the master of none. But there's an often misunderstood paradox at play here. A paradox where a well-placed distraction isn't a distractor, but a catalyst. Isn't that interesting? So I want to talk about the science of this. And we're going to talk a little bit about flow states and cognitive offloading, things that I've had to research so that I can do this podcast with you. So what happened to me on the track? Well, it wasn't magic. I mean, kind of was, because I was like, wow, I ate. But it wasn't. It was what sometimes psychologists call a flow state. Now, a flow is simply like a feeling of being completely immersed in an activity. You're in the flow. Have you heard that? Like in the flow. Sometimes time seems like it's disappearing, and you feel like it's effortless, and you're just sort of at one with what you're doing. Have you ever felt that? Like I remember like swimming as a child. I was doing laps, and you get into this flow state, and you're just doing the laps. You're doing the laps. That's flow state. I sometimes do it when I'm writing, especially when I'm writing a song or writing a chapter. I can get into that flow state. I can do it when I'm painting a painting. Creativity often helps me get into flow state. But I know that a lot of athletes get into this flow state. And normally when we're facing a difficult task like running, which is grueling for me, our conscious mind kicks in, and our little voice is saying, this is hard, you're tired, how much longer? And you're like this, your brain is like this vigilant gatekeeper going, you can't, it's hard, you gotta finish, you did this before, it hurt, right? You felt like that? So it feels like it's too much and too hard, and it's so opposite to flow. So when I started talking with my dad, right, my brain started to engage in a different kind of work. The conversation that I had with my dad was becoming more demanding. I had to pay attention to what he was saying and what I needed to say. And it was fascinating because that made me, or at least my conscious mind, completely shift to being focused with the discussion with my dad, and shifting from my former focus of the physical discomfort of running. And this is what is called cognitive offloading. I've heard some people call it mental redirects. It's a thing that you just shift. Now, here's the interesting thing. I remember as a child when I was doing my homework, age 13, 14, 15, I literally could not sit at my desk in my room in a quiet place, which is where you think I should do my homework. I needed the distraction. I needed the television on. I was at the dining table. The radio was on, TV on, people were around, my parents were around, people would drop by, and I'm sitting there with my homework all laid out on the dining table. And I always remember my mum saying to me, it's time to move your homework off the table, we're having dinner, we've got to set the table for dinner. Isn't that interesting? So, going back to the running, so I was redirected to this conversation. But what happened is the running became more automatic. It became subconscious. It became like my brain wasn't like having to deal with it anymore. It actually got on with the job of running. And I no longer had this sort of mental resistance. And this distraction of the conversation provided just enough cognitive load to bypass this mental block, which I think is really, really cool. So think of it like this. If you're trying to push a heavy box and you keep thinking about how heavy it is, it feels heavier, right? But if someone asks you a complex question about your pushing, like, hey, are you moving that box? Your mind is momentarily diverted and your body might just push that box effortlessly. I don't know. It could be. It's like this secondary task, or this, the secondary task becomes the primary brain's focus, which is like talking about it. And so therefore the body can just, it's almost like there's a disconnect between the body and the brain for a minute. Very, very interesting. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is when our mind is hyper-focused on trying to solve the problem, it may not solve it. But when it's gently distracted by like a seemingly mundane or maybe pleasant secondary activity, like me being out there watching television while I'm doing my homework or talking to my dad while I'm going running, maybe our subconscious is kicking into gear and saying, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to make this happen for you. So I think this is a really cool opportunity to be very productive in a multi way. And I'm not saying multitask because maybe we'll never get anything done. But it's weird. Sometimes I need multiple tabs open on my browser, and I do need to hop. Maybe it's my ADHD, which I'm not actually diagnosed as, but I think I do have it. Like, I want to hop around, but maybe it's my brain saying I need a quick distraction so that I can then go back to solve the problem. Or maybe watching television or having the TV on or music, which is better, in the background while studying, or having a podcast or something while you're doing your homework, your work, your chores, could be the answer. I know a lot of athletes actually run with their music, right, in the headphones. So, and I totally respect those who need complete silence. Like, you have it, like go for it. But for others, maybe a low-level engaging background, like distraction, might help. And it's not to say that the primary task becomes more interesting, but it's sort of occupying the brain in a different way, and it's creating this sort of hum, I guess, that allows the deeper focus to emerge, which is what I find so fascinating. And what makes me feel like I am sort of not that sort of like ADHD, that maybe there is a method to this that actually helps with our productivity. And I would say that more so when a task feels really overwhelmingly difficult, the very act of intensely focusing on its difficulty becomes a barrier, how hard it is. Whereas if we just distract ourselves momentarily and we're stopping pushing to get that done, we're distracted for a minute, like even step back from it for a minute, it helps us to start. So I love this other saying that I use, which is slow down to speed up. So slow down, get out of the way for a minute, and then allow, this mental hurdle to pass. So, look, I think overall, I don't feel like it's about overly multitasking. We want to make sure that we're really focusing on something that's going to move the needle and do something and be productive. And so I don't want to be misinterpreted. However, it is kind of funny that we like to distract ourselves at work, or we're distracting ourselves when the phone rings or the kids come in or something happens, and it's sort of, maybe there's a reason. Maybe our brain is saying, cognitive overload, I just need to kind of get out of the way and then come back to the problem. So I don't know if you enjoyed this. I certainly am going to take more notice when I need to do a big, heavy task and, feel like that I have to, get it done, that maybe I can unblock my productivity and unblock my creativity and unblock my running with something else for a minute, or even in parallel. For me, it's about the parallel. I'm really curious about that, about doing two things at once, one taking over the hurdle of the other and making it as if it's already done. So I'd love to hear your examples, if this has happened in your life, and if you were able to see the power of redirection happen in your day-to-day, and what the outcome was, if it was able to unblock your path, your creativity, your whatever you need to do. So please send some feedback to me, and definitely come out and check theCrea8ve, TheCrea8ve theCrea8ve.com is where we're coming to play and build our dreams and become passion leaders. So look forward to seeing you there, and thanks for listening today. Can't wait to hear from you. Bye.